Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Cybersecurity Requirements for Federal Contracts Seminar. Thanks for braving the rain and I think everybody pretty much doubled their commute time here if you traveled locally. I know I did, coming in from Stone Mountain. So we're glad you all are here. Welcome to Georgia Tech, the Hodges Room. Just quickly, I'll go over some logistics. First off, I'm Don Patel. I work with the Georgia MEP here on this floor, actually. And for logistics, basically the bathrooms, if you didn't see them, are directly behind the room in that direction. And there's also, if we had to evacuate, there's a stairwell directly across from the room to exit. And if I could just remind everybody maybe to mute your cell phones. And that's probably it for logistics. Plenty of food left out there if you want to get up and grab something if you haven't had a chance, or get a coffee refill. Go ahead and do that. We'll be taking a break also if we stay on schedule. Yeah, I looked at Dave. So let's just briefly go over the agenda. We're going to start off. We have some great sponsors that really help us pull off this event. So we're going to let them introduce themselves and tell just a few minutes about their program and what they do. And hopefully that'll be good for connections for some of you. And then we'll go right into Dave Steerin's presentation. Dave is the division chief for programs and partnerships for the National MEP program. Dave, why don't you put your hand up, they can see you. Dave will be our first presenter. And then we have a vendor partner of ours, Cytelix, that is going to talk a little bit more on the practical side of what a service would look like in cybersecurity. And, oh, there's Spencer. Spencer Cobb from Cytelix will be speaking on the second presentation. And we really encourage you to, we'll have some time for questions at the end, but we would encourage you to, if you've got something burning, you want to ask it, put your hand up. The presenters don't mind if you talk or ask questions during the presentation. In fact, we probably encourage it because it will get some good conversation going. So on that note, let me introduce our first sponsor, Karen Feit. Karen is the director of the Georgia MEP.
I asked if it was being recorded, do I have to use the mic? And he said, yeah. So I'll use the mic. On behalf of Georgia Tech and the Georgia Manufacturing Extension Partnership, or Georgia MEP, I also wanted to extend my welcome to y'all, and excited that y'all did brave the rain and bad weather, and know that you will benefit because, as Don said, we have some great speakers. The Georgia Manufacturing Extension Partnership is a part of Georgia Tech, but we're also part of a national network of MEP centers that is funded out of the Department of Commerce through NIST. And that is one of our partners and speakers today, too. So if you have manufacturing facilities in other states, we have connections there. But we can also help, our mission is to help Georgia manufacturers to grow competitively. We want to help them with their organizational excellence and operational performance so they can compete in the global marketplace. And we do that by both making a lot of connections. We have a lot of partners that we work with throughout the state, and we make connections to Georgia Tech, make connections to technical U.S. labs or NIST labs for technical issues, and we also have internal expertise. We have about 40 people in the Georgia MEP, most of them located out in the state. We have 10 regions, and we probably have a staff person within an hour of where your manufacturing operation is. And we provide services in the areas of things like process improvement, which would include lean manufacturing. It would include quality management systems. And then we have a group that does energy and environmental support, which is energy management systems, clean energy, sustainability services, things like that. And then the last major group that we have is to provide services and growth services. And Don is the manager of our growth services, and those groups can help you with product development, access to new markets, looking at where you can find new customers, new customer sectors, and then how you can grow your business through digital manufacturing, cybersecurity, those types of issues. So there's a lot of ways that we do provide services to help companies grow competitively. So I wanted to give you a high level of what we do and who we are. I'm excited that y'all are here and excited that we have such great partners that helped us, bring the right resources and experts in to meet with you. I think next is going to be Nancy's going to talk about the GT Pack.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, I am Nancy Cleveland. I'm filling in for both of my bosses, Chuck Schottel, okay, as well as Joe Bulow. Chuck is across the street. He is teaching classes at our Contract Education Academy, and Joe is steady working with our clients. Okay, a little bit about GT PAC stands for, of course, Georgia Tech Procurement Assistance Centers. Like Georgia MEP, we are a part of a nationwide network of TPACs. And we also have TPACs in Guam, Puerto Rico, and the District of Columbia, right? What we do is we help businesses who are interested in doing work with the government identify, qualify, and hopefully win government contracts. Our results as of the end of fiscal year 2016 show or demonstrate that we counseled over 2,500 businesses. They won over 5,000 contracts and subcontracts worth over $1.9 billion. That's with a B. So with our assistance and expertise, we're excited to, with our program and our growth. And we are also located in 9 locations as opposed to 10. And those include, of course, our base, which is Atlanta, Athens, Augusta, Albany, Gainesville, Savannah, Columbus. No, I have Athens out, Carrollton, and of course, Warner Robins. So we're close to a lot of the military installations or bases, and I don't want to get all messed up with that because I call bases installations and things like that. But anyway, also, we are happy to be here because we work closely with Fort Gordon, which, as many of you know, is where the new Cyber Command has moved to. Although this is a slightly different topic, it is, or can be, interrelated. And that's why we're excited to be here, and we're excited that you're here as well. Thank you. Let's see who's next. John.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. My name is John Morehouse. I'm the director of the Center of Innovation for Manufacturing here in Georgia. So how many people here have heard of the Centers of Innovation? Okay, so great, then I'm glad I'm here. So the Centers of Innovation are part of the Georgia Department of Economic Development. There are 6 centers, and they're all aligned with strategic industries in the state. So there's an aerospace center, and you're going to hear from Amy shortly, agribusiness, energy, IT, manufacturing, and logistics. And so our center is the manufacturing center. We're a huge center of 2 people, and what we do is essentially we are free, objective consultants in the state. We have manufacturing backgrounds, both of us do, and it's our job to kind of use that expertise in combination with knowing what resources are available in the state that could help manufacturers. So for example, a small company came to us, growing company called the Stair Barrier, and they make these kind of designer baby gates that are made out of cloth. And the main goal of these things is that, if anybody's ever wrestled with a baby gate before, they're a pain in the butt to set up. Kids are always knocking them down, and they're falling apart. So what the Stair Barrier did, startup company, they created this easy clip system that you could clip to stair railings and quickly set up your baby gate and take it down. And because it's a cloth product, you can actually get it in several different design patterns, so you can kind of match it to the interior design of your house. So they came to us and they said, hey, we'd really like you to help us with our manufacturing. We're looking to expand. And so they were working with a medium-sized cut and sew manufacturer in Cornelia. And we went with them to the site and kind of just, walked through the production line with them and said, okay, after this, have you ever thought about plant layout and, efficiencies and lean and, putting in different changes to make your processes more efficient? And so we work with both the small company and that manufacturer and connected that manufacturer to Karen's group in the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. They went in and did a project where they actually gave them a suggested new plant layout. So you could see that we were just basically the connectors there, and we know what MEP does, and we know what other people do in the state, and we're able to talk to the manufacturers, have this knowledge, and get them connected to the right people to solve their problems. So that's a good example, and you can see that we work with startups, we work with medium-sized manufacturers, and we work with the large-sized manufacturers. So that's kind of our bread and butter. The other thing we do is look at future trends. So what's going on in manufacturing in our state and what's coming down the pike. And so that's why we're here today. Thought this was a great event to get a lot of manufacturers together to talk about cybersecurity, what its impact is on the manufacturing industry, and how you all can prepare for that. So that's why we're here today and co-sponsoring this event. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. And the main takeaway I want you to all leave with today is that, if you're a manufacturer and you're experiencing a problem and you're not sure, how to solve that problem, feel free to turn to us. We know you have connections with MEP as well. If you're working with them, feel free to turn to them. We all kind of work together behind the scenes. But we're here and we're, willing to help with any problem that you may have and help you grow. So with that, I'll turn it over to my partner, Amy.
All right, so has the coffee kicked in? So how many of you have heard of the Centers of Innovation now? Yeah, okay, good. So we have a very, the centers are all slightly different in how we complete our tasks, but the way I describe it is, do y'all know what the sport of curling is? Right, the winter sport? Well, the company has to have the stone, the company has to throw the stone, but we're going to sweep madly to make it go farther, okay? And so how we do that, our toolbox is really varied, and every interaction with every company is very different. Our toolbox includes MEP and GTPAC, and we make these connections for you. So if you're an aerospace company and you do aerospace manufacturing, check in with us as well. To give an example of one of our projects, one that's several years old but is a good representation of what we do. Thrush Aircraft builds agricultural aircraft down in South Georgia. They needed a new engine. They wanted to build a bigger plane. They weren't finding exactly what they needed. They called. We talked to them. GE had just purchased a Czech company that we knew about. We connected them to GE. They purchased the Czech engine, brought it to the U.S. So that was the first connection. Then they decided, have to get it certified by the FAA. So we built a partnership with Middle Georgia State University, which is a 4-year aviation school in Middle Georgia. Thrush bought the testing equipment. The school retains that equipment so that they can use it again in a future revenue generating. And we did an industry match. We did a small grant. The work was all completed at the university. That benefited the students. It benefited the instructors and the professors. It benefited Thrush. Thrush went back, hired 40 people down in South Georgia, over $1 million in payroll. And 3 years later, they have now announced a big expansion, right? They're building on that success. So that's a slightly different view of how we interact with the universities, with the company. We draw on whatever we need, to help that company. So we'll try to sweep for you if you want to do that. I want to take just another minute and tell you about a project that I've been working on for the last 2 years. We wrote a grant and received a grant from the Department of Defense the Office of Economic Adjustment, and we were doing research on defense contracts within the state of Georgia. So everybody talks about the military installations and how much it means to the state. I'm a former Air Force officer. I know there's a business side of that. So what was the business side? $6.4 billion in contracts executed in Georgia every year, the last 2 years. So now, how do we help those companies? Well, we partnered with GTPAC. We hired a data analysis and a web developer, and we have created a new tool. It's called the Georgia Defense Exchange. Just launched this week. It's a free service. It builds on FedBizOps and USA Spend, publicly available data, but what we've done is create a much easier user interface. It simplifies things a great deal. You can see all of the defense contracts that are available right now. You can search by contract history to the back 5 years. So if you're looking for a partner, you can look in the site, see that contract history, and maybe find a potential partner. And there's a contractor directory you'll be able to connect within the platform to these contractors. So it's a neat tool. I think it's going to advance defense contracting in the state, hopefully help small businesses get into that. And just to touch on that, of that $6.4 billion, over $3 billion is in services. So it's not necessarily aircraft, ships, bullets. It's medical services, engineering services, contract services on the installation. So there's a lot of opportunity there. So that's why I'm here with 2 hats. It's you can see it at georgia.org/GDX, and it's called Georgia Defense Exchange. And I hope you'll sign up soon. Yeah, great. Okay, Don, thanks.
We'll go ahead and get switched over to our presentation, Dave, if you want to come on up. And we will have the 2 presentations available. Normally, we'll email those out to the attendees, so feel free to take notes, but we'll be having copies of those also. Let me start the program. There you go.
So thank you, Don. Thank you, Karen. Thanks to the folks here in the state of Georgia. My name is Dave Steeren. I'm from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, specifically the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, or if you'll allow me the rest of the day, I'm going to refer to us as NIST MEP because it's a whole hell of a lot easier to say. So it's great to be able to be here to talk to you about cybersecurity and about specifically the requirements that underlie the DFARS cybersecurity requirement that are connected to the NIST Special Publication 800-171. A couple things I want to mention before I actually get into my presentation. First, events like this are happening around the country. A lot of them have been spurred by a partnership that's recently been executed at the national level between NIST MEP and the National Association of PTACs. It's funny, you guys say TPAC in the state of Georgia. Everywhere else they seem to say PTACs. They switched the T and the P. Yeah, there you go. The purpose of this is, when you look at manufacturers that do business with the government, a lot of them are served by the PTACs around the country. A lot of them are served by the MEPs. So why not collaborate and make sure that we're leveraging resources through both of those great programs to the most efficient manner, most effective manner for the service of small manufacturers. So that's really what this nationwide collaboration is about. Where we're focusing initially is in cybersecurity. And the reason for that is because of the DFARS requirement that you all are, I'm sure, aware of. And what we're doing is we're really helping to promote awareness, create understanding, and make sure that you folks know that you have resources that can help you, that you don't need to necessarily spend an arm and a leg to comply with the DFARS requirement, and that perhaps most importantly that you know that the DFARS requirement is real. It's not going away, and it's not going to be extended. So if you're doing business with the DoD, you need to be compliant by December 31st, 2017. And hopefully what I'm going to do over the next 45-ish minutes, Don, is help you understand exactly what the DFARS requirement is, what compliance means, and even more specifically what the NIST Special Publication 800-171 is all about, and how you can implement 800-171. So I'll tell you, as you have questions, feel free to raise your hand, ask the questions. I'm not at all shy about giving answers and having dialogue. I encourage you to have questions. Just remember, though, I'm the good cop here, okay? I say that because, and I'll show you a slide in a couple of slides, NIST is a non-regulatory agency, okay? So we're not the regulators. The regulators here are the Defense Department. What we do is provide the technical standard that underlie the regulations. So I'm really here today to help you understand what the technical regulation is and really what the DoD's intent is. And I say that because I'm guessing when we go through this, a lot of your questions may be oriented toward the regulation. And I'll do my best to help answer some of those questions, but again, I'm not the regulator, so I'm not the DoD guy, so I can't speak with authority on behalf of the DoD. I can speak with authority on behalf of NIST standards. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So we put this slide up because when you think about cybersecurity, it's really an aspect of information security. When you think about information security, it's really a component of overall security. And I always like to start with a question. And I like to ask folks, so, you know, when you leave your home and you go to work for the day in the morning, what do you do with your front door of your house? You lock it, okay? Because it's a way, it's a cultural norm that you have where you protect, you secure that which is important to you, for your family. It's an asset. You do the same with all of your information assets, with all your IT assets. Can you operate your business without computers, without the internet, without all the connectivity that you have for all the devices that you use? Do you consider the information that you develop, that you exchange, that you process as an asset? I'm not expecting answers to that. I just want to stir thought. And the reason that I'm doing that is because when you think about information security, and you think about the world today, you know, really everything is all about IT today. It's the industrial Internet of Things. Everything that we do is really exchanging information. I've spent 30 years, my entire professional career working in manufacturing. You know, I understand manufacturing. I get the different facets of manufacturing. And, you know, when you think about how manufacturers operate today, how they're successful, you think about what are kind of some of the fundamental building blocks associated with manufacturing processes and operations. And if you're not thinking about information and IT as one of those fundamental building blocks and how you manage it, how you secure it, you're probably not doing as well as you could or should be doing. So today with information, the pace of change of technology is really growing at a pace where our ability to protect our information assets is it's becoming more and more difficult. So it's because of that, really, that we came to realize that today we're vulnerable. We're vulnerable to a lot of things. And I'm not giving this presentation to be gloom and doom. I'm not a paranoid kind of guy. But this is just kind of reality. Lots of rain today, right? I live in Maryland. My sons, I have 3 sons. God give me strength. They go to college. Just paid my first 3-time tuition bill. They go to a school in a little small town on the eastern shore of Maryland called Salisbury. And a tornado touched them. Who's ever heard of a tornado touching down in Maryland? So, things happen, is my point. And, when you think about your assets, they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable to natural disasters like freak tornadoes hitting, structural failures. They're vulnerable to attacks, cyber. I was sharing with Spencer, I think it was, I was fortunate enough a couple of weeks ago, I shared the stage with a woman named Essie Miller. She's the Deputy Chief Information Officer for the Defense Department. And she started her talk by saying that a typical day in her life is responding to over 8 million cyber attacks that hit defense systems every day. Every day. 8 million. Crazy. Message there is, if you're operating a business and you don't think you're going to get hacked or at least be the target of a hack, wake up. It's going to happen. And there's some alarming statistics about what the result of cyber attacks are for small businesses. My colleague, who's a cybersecurity program manager at NIST MEP, likes to quote one study that shows something close to about 60% of all small businesses that are the victim of a major hack are not just not recovered, but go out of business within 6 months. So, think about that. Are you secure? Are you ready? You know what you got to do? And I'm saying all that independent of this DFARS requirement. This is just, go back in time to the late 80s when the MEP program was created. MEP program was created in the late 80s because small manufacturers in the U.S. were getting their lunch eaten by Japanese competitors that were coming in. Think back to the auto sector in the 80s, right? Think about how much better Toyotas and Hondas were than Fords and Chevys in the 80s. And the U.S. suppliers just couldn't keep pace. So MEP was created to help small manufacturers get access to the resources they needed to be able to compete. One of those was Lean, right? The Toyota production system. Who in here is a small manufacturer? Implementing Lean? One of the fundamental things that you do, right? Yeah. My message to you is cybersecurity, it's got to be one of those building blocks. It's got to be one of the fundamental ways in which you operate. You have to secure your assets. So, let's move on. We get into specific guidance and what we're doing, who we are. Who's heard of NIST? Okay, quick intro. So I'm a federal civil servant. I'm an employee of the U.S. Department of Commerce. We are an agency of the U.S. Department of Commerce, and we're a non-regulatory agency. So among other things, we are the folks that we service the nation's Metrology Institute. What that means is we have responsibility for the measurement infrastructure in this country. We're the people that say how long the meter is, how much the kilogram weighs, how bright the candle is. Basically, the 7 international units of measure. We realize, maintain, and disseminate traceability to the country so that they can be used in industry, in commerce, and in society. And you don't realize really that we're there because we do a good job, to be honest. I'm going to tout our own horn there. Anybody ever been to a developing country? Any developing country? Generally, they don't have quite as good a metrology system in place in developing countries. We've done a lot of work at NIST to help developing countries understand the importance, but when you don't have a good metrology system in place, basic commercial transactions, you don't have confidence. You got to buy a gas, you're not sure if you get the correct octane, you're not sure if the pump is dispensing exactly what you think. So in a very basic sense, that's kind of what we take care of at NIST. And we do that through a very complicated system that involves partnerships with the states, but so that's who we are. And we really, 7 international units of measure, basic research and standards development for the spectrum of science and technology. One of the areas where we have responsibility is, in fact, information technology. In addition, we manage this thing called the National Network of MEP Centers, Manufacturing Extension Partnership. Our center here in Georgia is at Georgia Tech. Karen is the director. John is the director of field services. As you heard, MEP is all about helping small manufacturers, helping manufacturers, but with a particular emphasis on small manufacturers, do what you need to do to compete with. Really, I can't simplify it any more than that. In this space of cybersecurity, we have a kind of a unique position because our agency, NIST, has done a great deal of work in developing guidance and technical standards for the country, and I'll give you details about that really underlie all aspects of cybersecurity, but especially the DFARS requirements. And what we're doing with our MEP system is we're now disseminating awareness and assistance out to manufacturers through our nationwide network of centers. So, really I just talked to you about MEP. If you have any questions about MEP, I would encourage you to speak to Karen and the folks here at Georgia MEP. Who's heard of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework? Okay. As we get into this portion of my presentation, you're going to see a lot of words on my slides. I'm not going to read my slides. I'm going to paraphrase them for you. My slides will be available. I put these words on here because I want you to be able to go back after the presentation and access this information. So back in 2013, as it was, President Obama, through an executive order, called for NIST to lead the development of a cybersecurity framework for the nation, not for the Defense Department, but for the nation, realizing the importance of cybersecurity. So we led an effort that we engaged a lot of sectors of industry, a lot of aspects of society, and in 2014 we published a cybersecurity framework. Any guys ever taken a look at that or gone to access it? Pretty daunting thing. It's really big. But what I highlight down at the bottom here is the fundamental tenets of the core of that cybersecurity framework. And I want to take just a second to go over those with you because they make sense and they're very basic. And I think you'll see why if you haven't been exposed to these. So there's 5 principles that are found in that framework that whether you're an individual, you're a business, you're a manufacturer, you're a non-profit organization, you should be implementing these 5 fundamental tenets to manage the risk associated with cyber attacks. Folks, that's really what cybersecurity is about. It's about managing risk. That's why the Defense Department has put in the DFARS requirement to help manage the risk. The special publication 800-171 that came out of the framework is about managing the risk. So, 5 fundamental tenets identified. What are your assets? What constitutes your assets? What are the boundaries? Can you guys all answer that about your business? Do you know all your assets? Have you gone through the process? Probably not. Think you should? Once you've identified your assets, are you protecting them? What does that mean? Once you determine your assets and whether you're protecting them, then you detect if somebody's trying to hack you. If you've been hacked, do you even know it? Do you have systems and measures in place so that you know your assets that you've protected, somebody's trying to get at you. If you've been hacked and you detect it, you respond. Right? So once you've been hacked, what do? There are processes that you can use to respond to that. Once you've responded, can you get back to a measure of normalcy? That's recovery. So I just gave this framework about that thing, right? That a bunch of geeks put together and developed over several years. I just gave you the essence in five basic steps. That's what it's about. So when you think about it in those basic terms, it makes sense, folks. And really from the standpoint of business, whether you got a DFARS requirement coming at you or not, it's good business. It's good hygiene. Okay, so what is this requirement? The DFARS contains a clause, 254.204-7012, that requires defense contractors and subcontractors to do 5 things. And to paraphrase these 5 things, basically what this clause requires you to do is take the adequate steps to manage the risk associated with your systems when you're doing business with the DoD. And the DFARS clause specifically relates to covered defense information, controlled unclassified information. Okay, so it's not everything that you do, but it's information that you process that's considered covered defense information or controlled unclassified information. I'm going to give you more details about that in the coming slides. So what is the purpose? Again, it's looking to basically manage the risk associated with controlled unclassified information in non-federal systems. Okay, so there are standards and processes that apply to the DoD systems. These are for contractor systems, non-federal systems, that are processing, generating, and communicating with DoD systems for covered defense information and controlled unclassified information. Also, by putting this clause in the DFARS, which applies to every contract, the intent was that there would be a single approach that could be implemented across the DoD for all contracts. So there wouldn't be multiple approaches depending upon contract to contract situation. Hopefully that makes sense. So what does it mean? And this is an interesting aspect of this, because this is probably answers some questions or hopefully addresses some areas of uncertainty that you folks may have. So after December 31st, 2017, you get a defense contract and you sign a contract, you're self-certifying that you're in compliance with the DFARS clause. Think about that. Okay, so that clause is in there. You sign your name, you're saying, I'm doing everything that the DFARS clause says that I need to do. Again, it applies to info systems that process, store, or transmit CUI. The definition of controlled unclassified information is here. The reason I put that up there, and again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about CUI. CUI is not classified information; it's controlled unclassified information. So it's information that your prime contractor or your contracting officer deems is relevant to the national security of our country in conjunction with your contract. And there's a registry that the National Archives, who's the official keeper of controlled unclassified information, has developed that can help you answer the question, is this CUI or is that CUI? I'll give you a link to that in a second. In fact, there it is. If you go to this link right here, you can pull up the National Registry for CUI, and it will help give you some guidance about whether a particular type of information is CUI or not. Is that the end authority? No. And that's an important point to make. The end authority is the dialogue that you have with your contracting officer or your prime. Okay? So whatever you do in terms of your compliance with the DFARS, your system security plan, your incident response plan, your plan of action and milestones, which I'll tell you more about in a minute, you have to have your contracting officer, your prime, agree that what you're doing is okay. Next slide. What do contractors need to do to ensure compliance, and when does it apply? So, realizing that you have CUI that applies to covered contractor information system, clause calls for you to provide, quote, adequate security. And I'll find that here, which says you must implement at a minimum the following info security protections. This special publication 800-171, I'm going to talk to you about that. You got to do it by December 31st, 2017. So before I get into the details of 800-171, let me talk a little bit more about adequate security. Again, this is about managing risk for the DoD. And when you get into 800-171, there's 14 security classes and 110 security controls that you basically need to step through. If you encounter a security control that doesn't apply to your environment, or for which you're not in complete compliance, you have the opportunity through the DFARS to list why it doesn't apply to you, or the fact that you're not yet compliant, but you have a plan of action and milestones to become compliant. And folks, if you do that, you're compliant. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Yes, sir. So you have to have a system security plan, an assessment report. That means that you've stepped through these and you're delivering a report. The means by which you can report on incidents, and then that plan of action with milestones, which is if you're, quote, deficient with a particular control, what you're going to do to get there. That needs to be in place prior to the 31st. Cool. Uh-huh. Yeah, so that's a great question. That's a really great question. So there's two answers to that. I've been a division chief at NIST. I've been at NIST MEP for 10 years. Been at NIST for 30. I've been a division chief for 1 year though. And in my 1 year, looking at the world of cybersecurity, the most important thing that I've done is I hired a cybersecurity manager. That was not kidding, folks. And this woman is fantastic. She was a contributor to the development of 800-171 from the Information Technology Laboratory at NIST. I literally stole her. She's fantastic. What she's been developing has been an implementation workbook that goes through all 110 security controls and tells you where you need to look, what you need to consider, and then the things that you need to specifically do to be in compliance with that control for all 110. It's not yet ready. We're going to release it to our MEP centers this month. And I'm saying that because one option that you can take is you can employ the services of a third-party service provider like Cybersecurity or Imprimis or any one of 100 or maybe 1,000 other companies that are operating in this space, if you choose to do that. NIST, federal government, I'm not going to give any kind of endorsement whatsoever for Cytelix, the guys you're going to hear from next. That's an option that you can take. Work with your MEP center. Work with your PTAC. I'm going to say PTAC. To figure out the best approach for you. Okay? What the DoD is going to do, they're not going to audit you. Okay? They're only going to audit you if they believe that there's something that you've attested to, self-attested to, that appears like it's a false statement. Right? With all of that, the other thing that you need to do, once you've developed your system security plan and assessment report, you have to have the conversation with your contracting officer and or your client, because they're the approval authority. So you're protected. If you're wrong, they'll tell you that you're wrong, or if you're wrong and they don't tell you that you're wrong, but they sign off on it, you're protected. Does that help? In the meantime, for those that haven't gone through this process, I'm telling Pat we're going to deliver the keys to the kingdom with this implementation workbook. You can self-assess. Is everybody aware of that? You don't have to have third-party assessment for this. You're signing your name. If you choose third-party assessment, it's easy, right? Get a pro. Let them do it. Costs you money. Maybe a little bit more than you have. It all depends. But I'm also telling you that based on what I've seen my cybersecurity program manager develop with this implementation workbook, if you know your business and you got somebody that takes care of your IT systems, you can go through this. You can do it. You can do it on your own. It's a choice that you got to make. And I would encourage you, before you make that choice, again, consult with somebody that can help you. Consult with an MEP consultant. Okay? Let's see. So we already did cover. I'm going to go through this. Here's an interesting point right here. So the DoD emphasis with the D clauses is deliberately on information requiring protection. And the DoD basically asks primes to limit the flow down of CUI. Right? So there's one approach that you can take with this, and you can say everything's CUI. It's not correct. It's more expensive to do that. But the DoD is basically telling the Lockheeds and the Boeings and the other primes, limit the flow down. Don't just say everything's CUI. So flow down's a requirement, and that's another interesting thing. So as a subcontractor, it doesn't matter if you're at level tier 2, tier 4, tier 5. DFARS applies to you. It does flow down. You say that again, it does flow down. It flows all the way down the supply chain to raw material. It flows down. So as a contractor, you're thinking about up and you're thinking about down as well. You got folks that are supplying to you. Okay? So when you go through the steps of 800-171, you define your environment and you define controlled unclassified information. And there are contracts, which by the way have it marked, right? CDI, CUI. But for those that don't, define it, get the approval of the contracting officer, and go from there. And know that it flows up and it flows down. Okay? So when is it required in contracts? It's all solicitations and contracts. It's real. It's there. It's there. It's pervasive. And again, I mentioned there are some that are probably thinking, well, the DoD hasn't issued enough guidance. This thing's going to be extended. No. December 31st. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, okay, so COTS. So it's not intended to apply to COTS. Okay? So commercially available off the shelf. Realize, though, that if COTS are modified in some way, then COTS are back on the table. Okay? So if your contract is for modified COTS, COTS are back on the table. That's really why I put this up there. Okay? Okay. So what is 800-171 and how does a manufacturer implement it? So 800-171 was grown out of the NIST cybersecurity framework. And it was intended to provide a risk management framework for controlled unclassified information residing in non-defense information systems. It applies to all components of such systems that process, store, or transmit CUI, or provide security protections for such components. Let's see. And I'm going to now go into the details associated with SP 800-171. If you want to look up and actually get 800-171, here's a link. You can get that online. You can go to the NIST MEP website. It's available there. We have a cybersecurity page. We talked a little bit about controlled unclassified information. So I'm going to skip that. Just to make sure that everyone understands what non-federal information systems are. They're systems that are run by organizations such as contractors and subcontractors, colleges and universities, state governments. I had a question a couple of weeks ago when I did an awareness event. If a state government has a contract with the DoD, does it supply? Yes, it does. It's non-federal. Anything is non-federal. Yeah, so why does there need to be a means to protect this type of information? A whole lot of different ways to characterize it. Okay? I mean, just a crazy amount of ways. So really what 800-171 does is it tries to make it usable and organized way, understand what CUI is, and realize what you need to do to basically protect and manage the risk associated with it. You heard me earlier talk about the CUI registry. Here's a link to it again. If you have a question about something, you go to the registry. You can do a search and see whether there's a hit or not. And if there's a hit, the registry actually defines, what types of things are controlled unclassified. So if you search on manufacturing, and you look at manufacturing, you'll see that the types of things that are relevant to manufacturing include products, business, activities, including but not limited to financial info, data, statements, trade secrets, product research and development, existing and future product designs, and performance specifications. So, think about the types of data, types of information that your manufacturing process produces, stores, and transmits. And does it fall in line with what you see in this category definition? If you got a question, what do? Come on, I already gave you the answer. Go to your contracting officer, go to your prime. Ask them, is this covered defense information? Is this controlled unclassified information? Right? So, I'm going to skip over this because we basically already talked about this. One thing, though, that I do want to highlight, if you're doing other business with the government and it's non-DOD, like with NIST, for example, those procurements are covered under the FARS, Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, not the DFARS. And the FARS has a similar requirement as the DFARS does, and it's actually in place. It's just the enforcement is not expected to hit until next year. So I'm giving you a heads up if you're doing other, if you're doing work with NASA, for example, Department of Homeland Security. It's not covered under DFARS. You're going to get hit with the same requirement under the FARS clause as well. Okay. Some assumptions that were made when SP 800-171 was developed were that non-federal organization, you have some type of information technology structure in place already. Okay? You may not know it, but you do. So the process is to deploy the framework, allow you to identify exactly what your structure is, and that you have some type of safeguarding measures that you're already using. So there was a lot of flexibility that was designed into the development of 800-171 to allow organizations to start with what you have, right? Define your operating space, go through the assessment process to determine how you're protecting it, where you may be deficient, put that into a report, and then make a determination about where you need to go. That is essentially compliance, and that was all developed as part of 800-171 as a means to help, again, manage risk associated with your information systems. Okay. So, here it is. That's 800-171. There's 14 security classes that define this standard. And each one of these security classes has controls associated with it. These are the 14 security classes, security families that basically make up 800-171. One thing I'll say, you know, there are details associated with each of these, and I'll give you just a couple of quick details to show you how you can walk through this and what they look like. You know, a lot of them have to do with some basic stuff. Access control. Are you using passwords? You limit the number of unsuccessful attempts with a bad password. I got an iPhone that drives me crazy, right? Because it's a missed iPhone. I only get like a half a dozen attempts, and then the thing locks me out. I got to call my IT guy. It's what you got to do. There's also a lot of stuff in here associated with awareness and training for your staff. When I first started going through this stuff, it was enlightening for me to look at the amount of requirements in there for awareness and training of existing staff and new staff. So, you know, I ask you, when you bring somebody on, you give them IT security training? You think you should? Do all the folks within your organization know what their responsibilities are with respect to, maybe you're using Microsoft Word 2012 and you've upgraded to 2013? Do they know what they're supposed to do when those upgrades happen? I know at NIST MEP, what are we supposed to do? We call the IT guy, right? So the question is there awareness and is there training? And the single most, I guess, common source of vulnerability, and Spencer, you can, I'm sure, attest to this, for cybersecurity, is people. Right? There's simple steps that you can take to eliminate a lot of risks by training. So, the idea with the security requirements with these families is that so each one of those families of security, they have controls, and these all have well-defined structures, right? So there's very little ambiguity in the structure itself that contain a basic security requirements, and some of them have derived security requirements. And when you step through these, when you do the assessment, you have to look at the basic and the derived if they're there. And what we're doing with this implementation workbook is we're giving you guidance where you need to look and then what you need to do to ensure compliance. So we step through, yes sir. So in conjunction with FIPS, Federal Information Processing Systems, there are FIPS certified software products that are out there. And as long as products are in compliance with FIPS, as far as I know, that's good. Spencer, you can have, and FedRAMP. So the answer is yes, FIPS and FedRAMP. Fed, F-E-D-R-A-M-P, FedRAMP. So, let's look at one of these. Whoops. So, an awareness and training example. So remember, the security family was awareness and training, basic security requirement. And I'll read it. Ensure that managers, systems administrators, and users of organizational information systems are made aware of the security risks associated with their activities and the applicable policy standards and procedures relating to security of those organizational information systems. That happen? 2, ensure that organizational personnel are adequately trained to carry out their assigned information security related duties and responsibilities. And what do those assigned duties and responsibilities mean? And then derive from that, right? So you see that the basic security requirement, the implied derived security requirement, is that you need to provide training on recognizing and reporting potential indicators of insider threat. That's 1. Keep going. Another one. And this is really what we're doing with this implementation workbook. Sorry for the builds. So when you look at 3.2.2, which is still the awareness and training example, adequately trained to carry out their assigned information, how do you meet it? Right? This is what we're doing for each one of these 110 controls and the basic requirements associated with them. Give basic security training to new employees. Give security awareness training to users when information system changes occur, and provide annual security awareness refresher training. This stuff is not in 800-171. It's not in, it's not really in any guidance. Okay, this is what we're producing. If you contract with somebody like Cytelix, they'll help you do that. Right? If you work with your MEP center and they go through this implementation workbook, they'll help you do this. They'll help you understand what you need to do to meet the requirement. So again, I can't stress enough really that what we're doing with this implementation workbook, I believe, is the key here, because it really will help step you through each one of these 110 security controls. So folks, I'm going to skip forward because really the rest of my presentation is these security controls. It's more of the same, but it's really helping you understand the fact that each one of these families has got a series of basic requirements from which you get derived requirements for which you have to take action. And there's another one, access control. So one of the security requirements is limit unsuccessful login attempts. So to show that you comply when you go through the assessment, how do you do that? Say that you're limiting, how many consecutive invalid logon attempts during a time period. Boy, that's simple stuff, isn't it? What's lockout time, and is it automatically enforced? And then, who can release it? Can the guy that runs the system release it, or does it have to be by the system administrator? Again, is this stuff happening? This is fairly basic stuff. There are some requirements that are much more detailed, but you're getting the gist of what we're communicating. So, let me make a couple of quick points. Yes, sir. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. So, yep. So if whether it's basic or derived, it's there, and you have to comply. Mm-hmm. Okay. A couple of things with respect to 800-171. Again, the emphasis is risk management. It's looking at your system, defining your environment, defining what's applicable to your environment, creating awareness, and implementing the means by which you can manage risk. Some of the controls are not going to apply to your environment. When you go through your assessment, they don't apply, you need to state that they don't apply, why they don't apply, or if they don't apply, then meeting a basic security requirement doesn't apply, but an equally but effective alternative does, you need to state that as well. So they're intended to be flexible. There are other ways to meet them. So, a couple of cost-effective approaches that you can take. If you're doing a lot of things where maybe your business does 50% commercial, 50% defense, segment your environment, right? Limit the amount of cost and disruption that this is going to take to your operation. Isolate CUI. Put it in its own security domain. You can do that. That's absolutely, that's not just allowable, that's recommended. It's a more secure way, and it's cheaper generally to do that. You can, security domains, you can take CUI and you can put them in their own separate room. Put their servers in a separate room. So physical separation, logical separation, or you can use combination. And here's another thing. If you got multiple government contracts, use the same approach for all until you're told by a particular contracting officer that you keep it. Don't immediately assume that you need to restart for everyone. Okay? Again, the intent here is to manage the risk to the DoD. Make sense? Yes, ma'am. I guess I'm not totally sure that I understand your question. Mm-hmm. I'm smiling because the DoD DFARS requirement is hitting in about 5 months. So if you're doing business with the DoD, that's first in. So you should look to comply with that first. And what I'm suggesting though is perhaps you're making a component of a braking system for a contract with both the Army and the Marine Corps. What I'm suggesting is that you should use the same logical approach, same system security plan, same assessment, same plan of action and milestones for both of those contracts until you're told that you can. Yeah, okay. Yeah, and again, the clause is already in the FARS. What you're just not seeing is strict enforcement. And when it's having seen what's there, it's going to be a derivation of what the DFARS clause is. So, I don't want to tell you something and have it be incorrect, but there's a very good chance if you comply with the DFARS clause, when the FARS clause hits, you should be in good shape. So if you are doing work with a NASA or a DHS. Yes, ma'am. Stay tuned. What I've seen now thus far is that the FARS is an application of FIPS, and that's why really FIPS is a Federal Information Processing Systems that was designed to protect cybersecurity for federal agencies, and that the FARS is really going to be a subset of what the DFARS is. So again, if you comply with DFARS, you should be in good shape, but stay tuned on that. Okay. Dang it. Did I put this up here? How did this not come in? My most important slide is not up here. I wanted to show you what we're doing at NIST MEP. www.nist.gov. Sorry about that, Don. I was messed up with the presentations I was giving to him. www.nist.gov/MEP. We have a cybersecurity resources page on there. And it's on that page where we will post as soon as we can this implementation workbook for 800-171. www.nist.gov/MEP. So again, what we've talked about today a lot has been, the DFARS and what DFARS is all about. And Spencer, I think, is going to give you probably a lot of additional information about DFARS and some of the subtleties associated with the different systems. What I really wanted to try to do for you was give you kind of a basic guidance and understanding about what it is and then how 800-171 applies to it. So, in summary, to be compliant, you have to have in place a system security plan, okay? Your system security plan basically includes a report of the assessment that you take to step through 800-171 because you're required to provide adequate security, which calls for implementation of 800-171. Right? When you encounter a situation where you're not exactly lockstep, have done, check the box for one of those 110 security controls, which you will see, you need to have a plan of action and milestones for what you're doing because you're not checked that box yet. Okay? Does that make sense? They call that the POAM, plan of action and milestones. And those things, those three main things, need to be signed off, approved by your contracting officer and or prime. I say and or because there's different relationships that you may have. Okay? You sign that you have them in place. You get approval from your contracting officer. Right now, there is no DoD auditing that's occurring. There is no DoD certification that's occurring, other than for the information software systems that we're talking about with FIPS 140 and when you sign your name, you're attesting to the fact that you're in compliance. And you're having a conversation with your contracting officer and or your prime. Let them tell you what's CUI. Stuff's not marked as CDI, let them tell you what it is. Don't assume that everything that you're processing is CUI. Don't make it more difficult on yourself than you need. Questions? Yeah, so one other aspect, thank you. Sorry about that. So one other aspect associated with being in compliance means that you also have to have an incident response plan. So you got a system security plan, right? The assessment report, plan of action milestones, incident response plan. Basically, if you go back to detect and respond as two of the elements of the cybersecurity framework, you have to have a plan in place that once you detect that you've been hacked, you get 72 hours to report it to the DoD. You have to have in place that plan. Thanks, Spencer. I just neglected to state. So when you see that implementation workbook that we put out, all of that stuff will be very clearly stated in there. Now, where we are with the implementation workbook, when my program manager gave it to me, it's that big. But there's front-end material, and we're in the process of making it usable, right? So that business owners, when they sit down with an MEP or a PTAC person, can step through it, or a third-party service provider. Okay? Questions? John, we still got time for questions? Yes, sir. Yep. CSET. Great question. Everybody hear that? There are tools that have been created. Some are free public use tools, such as this thing called the Cybersecurity Evaluation Tool that was created by DHS in conjunction with the Department of Energy at Idaho National Laboratory. There are some tools that have been created by small business development centers. There are other tools that you can access for a fee from a third-party service provider. The question was, are these encouraged by DFARS? All depends. Who's seen the CSET? Who's gone and taken a look at the CSET? Pretty comprehensive. Would you turn a small manufacturer loose on the CSET? Don's shaking his head. It's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. It was a tool that was developed for the energy process control industry and then adapted for the manufacturing industry. And it's good. It's good, but it's detailed. It's real detailed. And what I like about that tool, honestly, is it's a great way. The first thing you do is you identify what standard you have to conform to, right? So in this case, it would be DFARS or 800-171. But it provides an option whereby you can actually do a network diagram of your information assets. So that's a great, to me, when I look at that, that's one of the best aspects of that tool is it gives you the ability to do a network diagram, to identify your information assets. The SBDC tool is a little, is much less detailed, much more basic. We started down the path and we're developing basic cybersecurity tools for MEP centers to use as practitioners when they engage small manufacturers. But the tool that we're developing is this implementation workbook for 800-171. So I'm not going to cheerlead for any one of them. What I'm going to cheerlead for is have a conversation with the contracting officer and or your prime to make sure you understand what you got to protect with CUI, what they need. And if you're not totally sure the path that you're going to take, have a conversation with your local MEP center and or PTAC. And our partnership is about pulling and leveraging resources. They'll sit down and they'll work with you and help you determine, yeah, you can do this on your own, or maybe you should go, with a third-party contract. Maybe you should use CSET. There's just so many different applications that it's tough to give a kind of a one-size-fits-all answer. Other questions, other thoughts? Has everybody come down off the ceiling a little bit about the DFARS requirement? Okay, well, I'm here until we're done, and I think, when you listen to Spencer from Cytelix, he's going to give you, some additional very useful information from the perspective of a third-party service provider. Again, as a federal agency, we won't do any kind of endorsement for any kind of third-party service provider. However, our centers, which are non-federal entities, they're already partnered with some third-party service providers, so that when they encounter manufacturers where a third-party service provider makes sense, they already have stuff in place and they can turn you on to them right away. So it's a fairly nice arrangement that we've put in place. Yes, sir. Yeah, I mean, you took the. So I'm smiling because the answer is yes. Yes, we're playing defense. Yes, we're proactive. Yes, we're reactive. Yes, the hackers are that good. Yes, they're that persistent. Yes, it happens. Yes, it happens all the time. That's why, I go back in history to when MEP was created back in 1988 to there being a market failure, if you will, right, where there was basic blocking and tackling that needed to occur for small manufacturers that hurt their competitiveness. It hurt our economy. Today, that basic blocking and tackling, if you're not starting there, you're not in business, right? It's not like the advanced companies are doing it. That's the basis from which you operate. And I see such an analog to cybersecurity. 10 years from now, we're not going to be having discussions like this because everybody's going to implement it. People are going to realize it. I mean, think about, and I'm sure Spencer's going to talk about it because he's going to scare you a little bit, right? But think about all the instances. When's it going to hit you? So these standards that have been put in place, these regulations, they're intended to overcome. The OPM thing, boy, that was interesting. Because the NIST cybersecurity framework was in place, and it was intended to address FIPS, Federal Information Processing Systems, like those used by OPM to safeguard cybersecurity. I'm not going to give a political statement, but you as a citizen, you would have to ask yourself, how well did they implement what was there that they were required to do? Okay, well, I hope I've helped you out a little bit. I hope I've given you a little bit of basic understanding. And thanks, Don. And don't leave, because what you're going to hear from Spencer is going to add a lot to some of the basic stuff that I just heard. Or excuse me, that I just did.
Appreciate it. We're going to take literally a 5-minute break. So if you need to go, you've had a lot of coffee, go ahead and go, and we'll start in 5 minutes. The bathroom.
hesitation about getting up during the presentation. So my name is Spencer Cobb, and I'm with a company called Cytelix. We are a partner with the Georgia MEP. And first I want to say thank you to the Enterprise Innovation Center and Georgia MEP and PTAC for having us. Okay? Should we turn it up a little? How about this? Is that better? So I'm Spencer Cobb. I'm with Cytelix. I'm the Director of Strategy and Business Development. We're a managed service provider providing cybersecurity services to small and medium businesses, and we focus on manufacturing. And we're partnered with the Georgia MEP, so we're happy to be here. Thank you to the Enterprise Innovation Center, Georgia MEP, PTAC, and all the other associated entities. I want to get to know you better. Thank you, Dave, for a great presentation. I think we can all agree that there's a lot of information to be absorbed here, and if you're hearing it for the first time, I'm sorry, but there is a lot of detail inside the DFAR and NIST 800-171. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, and hopefully prepare you to go back, to your organizations and start having the conversations to get, where you need to be in terms of your cybersecurity posture. So my presentation is called Cybersecurity in Manufacturing, Protecting Your Business from the Robot Zombie Hackmageddon. And so one of my favorite websites is called Hackmageddon. That's where that comes from. So I'm going to start with some statistics. As Dave said, he quoted one of mine, but I think to put it bluntly, if you haven't been attacked before, and you're not getting attacked right now, you will be attacked soon if you are a business that's doing business on the internet or is connected to the internet. We'll talk about some of the things you and your team can do to be better cyber prepared, whether or not you are in the DoD supply chain or not. We'll talk about the compliance items that Dave spoke about. What do you need to do? I think the idea of an incident response plan is really important. What are some of the questions you should be asking yourself and your team as you start this journey of being more cyber prepared? And then we'll have some Q&A. So first, a little bit about me. So I'm a native Atlantan, born in Decatur. Been in cybersecurity for about 20 years. I got lucky. One of the first jobs I had out of college in 1995 was with a startup here in Norcross that was in cybersecurity, and we were VeriSign's first acquisition. So it's ironic, 20-something years ago, we spent a lot of our time convincing businesses that they were even hackers. So this was just as e-commerce was taking off and everybody, internet usage was flying, businesses were getting on the internet, and we had to literally convince people, you might get attacked. There's a thing called a hacker, a guy who's going to steal something from you. And so now we kind of laugh at that, right? We know that there are hackers, and we know that there's a vulnerability to doing business on the internet, or a risk. And so ironically, 20 years later, a little less hair and more wrinkles, I'm trying to convince small businesses that they are, in fact, the ones who are being attacked. Sometimes not successfully, but generally getting attacked. And so I've come full circle here in a lot of ways. So Cytelix, my company, is the cybersecurity division of a bigger entity called IMRI, Information Management Resources, a couple $100 million federal integrator with a sort of vast array of disciplines in IT, so everything from database migration to software development to resource allocation. So we are the cybersecurity arm, and some of our customers are the Army Cyber Command. We have about 4 million devices that we're monitoring there. The intelligence community, we've got about 2.5, 3 million devices we're monitoring there. And what our core focus is basically continuous monitoring of all your assets. So that's mostly the pitch I'm going to do about us. We are partnered with Georgia MEP and happy to be doing that. And we're also partnered with various MEPs, manufacturing extension partnerships across the United States. And so this gives me a really interesting view into what other states are doing and what other small manufacturers are doing and how they're reacting to these new compliance regulations, whether you're a paint shop or you're printing circuit boards or you're, a metal shop or whatever it is. Everybody's sort of got their own idea of what type of information they have and how they're going to protect it. And Most people just kind of want to throw up when they see all this, and then after they get through that, they sort of say, okay, what am I going to do? So let's see. Let's do a quick survey. How many people know someone that has had their personal credit card or identity stolen? Raise your hand. Keep them up. Okay, that's most of the room. Okay, and raise your hand if you have if your company's been hacked or you know a company that's been hacked. Okay, that's pretty much everybody too. Anybody have a company that's been hit by ransomware? Okay, a few of you. And do you know someone who's paid ransomware? Okay, great, thank you. So if you kept your hands up, you're likely sort of starting to use your elbows and things like that. Interestingly enough, you cannot pick up the newspaper or your phone to read the, I guess kids won't even call it a newspaper later, it's just going to be your phone news. Every day there's something new to report on. I cannot keep this PowerPoint slide updated, literally something new every day. I'll point you to a couple of interesting ones though. So we all heard about WannaCry and Petya and not Petya and all these, whatever the latest ransomware is. 100 countries. One direct result of one of those is Merck. So think about this. Merck had to adjust their earnings because they couldn't make pills for 2 days. Millions of dollars they lost because they couldn't make the pills that we need. And my friend said, well, there's probably some people who are really depressed, during that time period. But I said, I don't think the supply chain doesn't function just like that. There's a little bit of a lag before you get your pills. But seriously, I would look at this top one. Chinese hackers are targeting global companies via the supply chain. Okay, so I want you to remember that one. And then there are some other ones here that talk about zombies. So everybody know what a zombie is when you're thinking about computer networks? This is where your network gets infected, probably your PCs on your network, with a piece of malware, and it just stays there, and usually undetected. And then suddenly, the hacker or criminal from a command and control center will tell that computer, hey, wake up and send all of your data to this place. That's what a denial of service attack is. So for those of you old enough to remember when telephone lines were actually connected to the wall, remember when they used to do the radio shows and they would have so many calls that the phone lines would go down, you couldn't get through? That's what a denial of service attack is. It's every computer targeting one IP address and sending so much data that it just can't handle it. It denies service to that one entity. So that's what zombies are used for, just to kind of give you a filler here. So humor me if you will. Let's kind of start with the end in mind. And because we're here at the Enterprise Innovation Center, I wanted to talk about innovation. So there's no doubt that with robotics and artificial intelligence and the industrial Internet of Things, does everybody know that term, Internet of Things? Great. That we are seeing efficiencies in the way we use data. We're seeing breakthroughs in science and technology that are changing the way that we as people live our lives. We're becoming more connected to the digital world as our physical selves. We're seeing medical breakthroughs. There's more safety in factories. Robots are, doing more than they've ever done. But what happens if we don't build security into these systems, right? What happens if someone takes control of these and does something that they're not supposed to? I think what you'll see is that a small little change in the calibration of one of these machines could make a big difference. So what would happen, let's say, if somebody like this got involved in this situation? Now, I'm not trying to channel Elon Musk here and say that artificial intelligence is going to bring about a set of robots that are out to kill humans and that we should all get in our Teslas and drive to SpaceX and go to Mars because it's over. I don't think we're building Skynet, if you're familiar with the Terminator series. But it is possible that someone could infiltrate a system and make just a tiny change in the calibration of a big machine, a system that can have huge impacts. Think about if someone attacked a centrifuge that spun and made something like uranium and took that and made it spin so fast that it just overheated. Well, you don't have to imagine it. It actually happened. There's something called Stuxnet that happened 10, 15 years ago. And this is where nation states got together and hacked Iran and their centrifuge. And it's widely reported that the U.S. was involved in that. And if you know the real story, it was an Atlanta company that was the basis of this offensive attack that happened with Stuxnet. So a tiny change in the calibration of this machine brought it down and put their nuclear plans behind by a decade. So I think the main point I would make here is we have to build security into our systems, and we have to think about those small changes. Thank you for humoring me there. So let's talk about, I missed the money shot, didn't I? Here it is. Those are all the Skynets and the robotics. So I think, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't. I think it's a possibility, but what's more likely is that intruders will infiltrate our systems and make those tiny changes. And so we have to understand what our assets are and how we're going to protect those. All right, so enough about me and my fantasy land here. Let's talk about you. These statistics are about you. As Dave pointed out in his presentation, this is widely quoted. Somewhere between 50 and 60% of small businesses who are successfully attacked will go out of business within 6 months. So these are mom and pop businesses, probably their life savings, everything you can think of, that they get hacked and they're gone. You know, paying a $5,000 ransomware is not a big deal, but you know, you get hit for $100,000 as a one-person shop, and you could be done. Some of these are pretty telling. 50% have fallen victim to ransomware, which our sort of informal survey just showed you. The top and last statistics I found in a study from April this year when I was building this. The same day I found the story about the Chinese attacking the supply chain. So think about this. You've got almost 80% of small businesses don't have an incident response plan. This is just bewildering to me. Dave made a great analogy. When you leave the house in the morning, well, if you live in Atlanta like me, you lock the door. It didn't work in central Michigan when I made this joke. Everybody's like, we don't lock our doors. I'm like, okay, you don't count, okay? I'm sorry, you can't, I can't, you know, I live in Virginia Highlands, we lock our doors. But the analogy I would make is, excuse me, you have a house, you have a lock on your front door, maybe you have a gate, maybe you have a dog, you have security cameras, you've got an alarm. If you come home and your house has been burglarized, you're going to go and see, okay, are they still here? Is my family safe? Okay, I'm going to call the police, and then I'm going to do an inventory. What did they take? How did they get in? I'm going to call the insurance company and report all this stuff. You know what you're going to do. You have a plan. But most of these businesses have no idea what they're going to do when somebody infiltrates their system and tries to steal their IP, steal their credit card numbers, take their customer data, all that stuff. That's just bewildering to me. And so if there's a couple of things I want to leave our friends who are in businesses here today, it's think about your plan. What steps would you take? If you came back to the office today and you were hacked, what would you do? Okay, a couple more, and these are from last month. Can't keep this stuff updated enough. So this is pretty crazy. We talked about putting in a training program, right? 4 out of 5 never measure the success of that. Go figure. 2 out of 3 don't measure whether their disaster recovery plan will actually work as planned. It's not really a plan if you haven't tested it. You know, it's like saying I installed new brakes, but we're just going to take a ride, you know, and if they don't work, I guess they didn't work. So this is important. In testing your training, you know, if you're going to test your employees not to click on stuff because you think it might be malware, then go back a month later and send them something and see if they click on it. Great test. It's probably the same person. Likely me. I'm only kidding. So what do we know? You know, IT is getting more complicated. More and more systems, especially in manufacturing, are connected to the internet. And that's great in the sense that it gives us access to more data than we've ever had. We know more about what we're manufacturing and how long it takes and how long it's going to take it to get to our end customer and what our bottom line is and who made it and when we need to order more, all this great stuff. But it provides another avenue of risk, and that is now we have constant system updates. We've got more and more connectivity, and this makes it a dynamic environment, and it's hard to stay on top of that. And most small businesses are already resource constrained. They've got, you know, Dave in the corner, or let's use a different name, sorry, Dave. John in the corner, who is the IT guy. That's what we always see. Like, okay, who handles this? Bill. Okay, well, who handles your server? Bill. Okay, who does this? Bill. And like poor Bill is wearing like 15 hats. So with all of this, and especially IoT, we've got more and more stuff to take care of as a small business. And it gets more and more complicated every day. And so you have to be able to understand what are the risks of putting these things on the internet. What is your data? What is your critical data? Who has access to it? How do you authenticate those people? How do you track that? Can you prove that they did that? What's your risk profile? And with all of this, now we've got these compliance guidelines. So who is attacking us? And no, I know that Tony Soprano probably didn't actually do this, but it makes a lot more sense than Al Capone. So nation states, if you've ever heard about Chinese hacking, this group here, Peepers, the PLA 61398, is an actual part of the Chinese military that hacks. They steal things. You've got hacktivists like Anonymous, and so if your organization falls against Anonymous and they get mad at you, I feel for you, because these guys don't want to take your money. They want to take your business and your credibility and make you look bad. So those are the ones that, you know, generally are getting involved from a philosophical perspective to make your organization change the way it does business. And then you've got organized crime. And so no matter what side of the political spectrum you fall on in terms of what's happening with Russia and the U.S. and hacking, a lot of the organized crime that happens and has in the past 10 years are Russian crime syndicates who have very skilled hackers who are stealing credit card information. Does anybody remember when TJ Maxx got hacked probably 4 or 5 years ago? This is one of the largest and most widely publicized hacks. And if you read up on this, these guys were pretty brazen. They stole millions of credit card numbers, but they were sending them back in clear text to a command and control center in Russia. Think about that. They didn't care. They had no idea or no fear of getting in trouble. The other thing is they were leaving messages to each other inside the system, basically like, hey, I've been doing this for 8 hours. I'm tired of stealing credit cards. I stopped here. So the next guy who comes in, the next shift, can continue to steal. That's pretty insane. But so there are organized syndicates that are doing nothing but making billions of dollars doing this. So let's see, why are they attacking us or anybody? Most of it is crime. They want to make money. And think about this. If you look at ransomware, most of the ransomware that's being charged with people, and let me explain what ransomware is just in case. So ransomware happens when someone generally is sent an email and it has an attachment that includes malware. They click on this, and within a couple of milliseconds, their entire network is encrypted, and they don't have the decryption key. And so your adversary at this point will then send you a nice message and say, you're going to send me $10,000 worth of Bitcoin, and I will give you the decryption key so that you can have your data back. And if you had not backed up your data, you're probably going to end up paying that $10,000. So lesson number 2 for the day, make sure you back up your data, not on your own network, but somewhere else, so that you can easily recover and you can tell these guys to go pound sand if you do get ransomware. But so cybercrime is big. Espionage is huge. So you can think of companies in China and other places that are actually stealing intellectual property. It's not just China. It's a lot of places in Asia, even South America. Brazil has a lot of hackers as well. Hacktivism and cyber warfare. Okay, so when we talk about some more of these statistics that are really important, there are some that it's hard to put a finger on what the value is. So what happens to your brand value if you get attacked? What happens to your customer relationships if they know that you've been attacked or you've somehow given up their data? What about your legal cost? Gee whiz, heaven forbid the lawyers get involved when you've had some sort of an incident. And by the way, we never want to call it a breach. Always call it an incident, because a breach has a significantly different meaning when it comes to the insurance companies and whether or not you're legally liable for what happens. So you always call it an incident. Your downtime. In the scenario I mentioned earlier where someone just changes the calibration of one of your machines just a little bit, What does that do? It could interrupt your supply chain. So now you can't ship your product and your customer gets mad and so they don't buy stuff and then your stock price drops. And then, it creates a cascade of negative events potentially. So there's all kinds of things that, potentially could happen when an organization gets attacked successfully. I won't go through these, but these are all different types of sort of tools, tactics, and procedures that can be used against a small and medium business. Same time, this is a bit of an eye chart, and I'm wearing glasses, so I apologize. Statistics are showing that SMBs, and specifically manufacturing, are getting attacked a lot. As I mentioned, I have the pleasure of working with companies in probably 14 different states right now, and we continually hear stories about small manufacturers that are getting ransomware. And so, great example, a company in Michigan paid it 3 times. 3 times they paid $10,000. It's just bewildering. And their answer was going to Best Buy and buying a router with a firewall on it. And so, you have to kind of shake your head because there are, as we've heard earlier, there are resources out there to help everybody. There's the MEP, there's a PTAC, there's a lot of people and places you can go if you need help. And so we're helping them. I mentioned the TTPs, tools, tactics, procedures. So right now I would say, the attack surface for most organizations happens to be leveraging the willingness of an end user person to click on something without thinking about it. And we've all seen it. We're all guilty of it. In my previous life, I had a startup, and I was CEO. We got acquired last year, and that's what brought me to this company. But as CEO, I signed off on shipping and on purchase orders. I get a FedEx request every day, and I think, are we shipping something today? Do we sell something? It looks just like FedEx. I'm a professional, sort of. And so, you have to train your employees. That's lesson number 3. If there's really one thing I would say is just have a conversation with your team, your employees about be skeptical. Be skeptical of emails. If it looks like something is awry, if it's broken English, if you're the CFO of your company and your CEO is requesting that you send $50,000 to an offshore account, and if that wouldn't already be enough of a clue that something's wrong, think about it twice. That's another story. Company in Ohio. The CEO went on vacation, sending some cryptic messages to the CFO, hey, I need you to initiate a wire to this account. Luckily, their accounting process was so bad that the CEO came back to the office and the CFO was like, I'm sorry I didn't send the wire. And he's like, what are you talking about? They had infiltrated, they spearphished, so they got into their account and basically impersonated the CEO, and the CFO was going to send the money. So we have to be vigilant in this. So I take issue with my own slide here. I would say that a lot of the times it's more often intellectual property that we hear in the manufacturing sector. This is a general SMB slide. We're hearing more about intellectual property and sort of the schematics to different things. But again, my viewpoint now is skewed because we've been working in the manufacturing sector for close to a year and hearing a lot of stories about what's going on there. So I mentioned the first one, real world anecdote from Michigan. Let's see here, and I think I said Pennsylvania, but same thing, they're both happening. Here's a good one, manufacturer in New Jersey. They make a widget, and they put out a bid for one of the components of said widget and got a bunch of responses. They chose a winner, but a couple weeks later, they were hacked. So they called in the FBI, and lo and behold, one of the respondents to the bid had used information about the company they gathered during the bid process to hack that company, and ended up stealing it and were selling it on the black market in China. So they recreated the entire widget based on a bid. So this comes down to the idea of what type of information are we sharing, and with whom are we sharing it, and how do we know who they are, and what's your process for sort of vetting your third-party participants in these types of activities. Okay, so it's supposed to be about the DoD and the DFARS, and yes, let's talk about, for me, boiling this down, because I'm not an engineer, I'm more on the business side. A few years ago, around the time that Obama put out the special order around, cybersecurity, the DoD was getting hacked. And this is not BS here. If you Google this, these machines have actually been fully replicated in China. The F-35, C-17, these are just the planes. There's ground vehicles, and it's not a co-development effort. So think about how much data has to go in to replicate this. This is a lot. And so I use this to sort of paint the picture, as Dave did, of why the DoD is doing this. They recognize that they are under attack. We all are. Every business is. But specifically the DoD, because hackers have realized that the bottom of the food chain has the least amount of resources and knowledge and ability to protect themselves. But yet they are connected. They're interconnected with all of their suppliers going up the chain. So they know if they can go in at the bottom, they can now get in through the top. So I won't belabor this too much. But again, FARS 252-204, 7012 is about data protection of controlled unclassified information. Probably worth saying it again. This is the schematics, drawings, maps, building plans, bid information. Think about it as anything an adversary would want to know about the way that your company does business that will help them gain access to you or your partners. And so you've got to be in compliance by the end of the year. If after you get a contract award, you have to represent that you are compliant within 30 days. The DFAR points to NIST 800-171 in the Cybersecurity Framework for its functional implementation of security. Okay? So the NIST Cybersecurity Framework is there. The special paper 800-171 deals specifically with this controlled unclassified information, so data protection, if you just want to be general. And the big one that Dave pointed out, and this is what is most cumbersome that we find with our customers, is there's a 72-hour reporting window. So if you have a cyber incident, and this is defined that any type of activity that can undermine your systems that are controlling, sending, storing controlled unclassified information. If you have an incident, you have 72 hours to report it. So, as Dave said, you need to do an assessment of where you stand in terms of your security posture for these 14 controls in NIST we'll talk about. You need a security plan. You need your plan of action and milestone. And you need to be able to report if something goes wrong. Now, if you never have anything go wrong, then maybe you don't need to do incident response and be doing monitoring. But we think you'll feel better if you do continuous monitoring. So let's see here. I think we've talked about this. We've talked about that. These are the 14 controls. And let me point this out. So the two that we focus on really are risk assessment and security assessment. That's italics. So we have a system where we're doing continuous monitoring and we'll alert you if something goes wrong, as well as help you get through all the sort of paperwork stuff. Okay, so just a little bit of review from what Dave said. You need to do some sort of baseline assessment. We actually do use the CSET that the gentleman here mentioned. So that's a cybersecurity evaluation tool. It is free. It's put out by DHS. It is complicated. You have to understand security to actually know what you're answering yes or no to. But essentially, this is 110 questions, the same amount of controls that you have in the standard. And you answer yes or no. Are you doing multi-factor authentication? Yes or no. Great. At the end of this 110 questions, it's going to spit out a score for you that represents the degree to which you are compliant with the standard. So the interesting thing is whether you score a 20 or a 100, if you do that and then you document, hey, we scored a 20, but here's our plan to address the other 80%, and here's our plan of action and milestones and how we're going to address it and who's going to do it and when, you're mostly there in terms of compliance. It's up to your contracting officer to say, wow, 20%. I don't feel good about doing business with you. You need to bring this up to a different standard. Furthermore, what we're seeing is that different primes have different standards for how they're dealing with this. If you talk to Lockheed Martin, anybody here working with Lockheed, you probably got an assessment or a quasi-assessment, a bunch of questions that you answer back. They're tiering, they're giving you a score and putting you into a bucket and saying, these guys are high, medium, low, risk is what they're thinking. And then hopefully they're putting you into a program for improving that. So they're managing that. If you talk to BAE, I presented up in New Hampshire with the nice lady from BAE who's managing their 25,000 manufacturers. They've got a different view. They just want to know, are you aware of this? Are you going to try to be compliant, or you will never try to be compliant? And then they're going to put you into a bucket and try and help. So they've got a sort of a vastly different, way of articulating and making sure that this awareness is out there. So, look for those letters from your primes. Look at the T's and C's, and as Dave said, engage with them, because it behooves you to have a relationship and understand what they think you need to do to be compliant. So the documentation, you need that security plan and plan of action and milestones. You need to implement some type of continuous improvement and awareness program. So a lot of this, we call it cyber readiness, right? You're never going to be secure. Your network doesn't look the same on Monday as it does on Friday. Bob in the warehouse brings in his iPad and connects it to the wireless network because he wants to watch movies while he eats lunch. Sounds like a pretty painless and innocuous thing, but you don't know where Bob's iPad has been. You don't know what type of security controls is on it. It should be against your security policy, if you have one, that people can't just bring stuff in and connect it to the internet on your dime and your security. So you want to be able to have a program that's in place that you can demonstrate that you've established what your policy is, you've let all your teammates and employees know, and that you have a way that you're going to be checking that on a periodic basis to make sure that you're continuously improving your cybersecurity posture. And then again, for the DFAR, that reporting aspect. So we at Cytelix adhere to the NIST cybersecurity framework. Everything we do is based on standards, and we spend a lot of time outside the DoD sort of market because, as an example, the MEP here in Georgia works with a lot of small businesses that don't have anything to do with the DoD supply chain. But the way that we position it is, if it's sort of good enough for the military and the DoD, it's definitely good enough for you as a commercial organization. So we do use the NIST cybersecurity framework, and as Dave mentioned, these are words to live by here that you can easily implement it at any company to at least start down the path, whether you do it yourself or with a partner. Okay. So, common questions to ask. Do you have CUI? What is it? Where is it? Who's got access to it? How do you authenticate those people? How do you track their access to it? How do you prove that they did what they say they did? Who is receiving it? How is it being received? Is it encrypted? Can you prove it was encrypted? So this brings on a whole separate set of questions. What we usually do is sort of say, okay, you're a paint shop or you're a metal fabricator. You've got schematics for a wing, let's call it, and they reside on this server. We would say, put that server behind a firewall on a subnet, limit the access to the few people who actually need it, make sure you strongly authenticate them, you log all the access to that server, it's protected, you limit the services that can be used to access that server, so you can't use Telnet on that, on that server. And so what you do is sort of build a layered security approach around that data on that server so that you can feel protected, but it's very easy to report that, which is we have a firewall, we know where our CUI is, we know who's going to access it, we know what those policies are around it, and we can prove it. So that's what you're going to articulate in your security plan. And I know I've oversimplified it, but really, majority of the business we talk to have a firewall. They have email encryption. They have, malware detection or something like that. They're doing a lot of this, but the key is you have to be able to document this process. Dave mentioned you probably have a password limit and a logout timeout. Most of us do that, and all of this can be affected by using Active Directory control. So it's not something you have to go out and buy, but you just have to be able to say, okay, we're going to articulate that in a policy that's written so that you can show your prime contractor we're doing everything that we are supposed to do. So that's another key point is it doesn't always cost you money to get into compliance. You just may need to take a step back and say, how do we articulate what we're currently doing in a document that someone else can come in and go, okay, I see what you're saying. Here's the people who have access to your CUI. Here's how you're authenticating them, etc. All right, other questions you might want to ask yourself. do you want to outsource or do you want to become an expert? Because as Dave said, there's kind of no middle ground. Just like hiring Pat Toth, which was great for all of us who are involved in this process here at NIST to help write the standard. It's very hard to yourself become an expert. You're going to probably have to look to augment your team if we're talking about the small and medium businesses. Big organizations that have lots of resources can pull in new people all the time. One of the things that we see is we have companies that are starting off with sort of our managed service approach, which I'll talk a little bit more about. I'm not trying to pitch us, but at least for the year to get them through compliance, and then they have a plan of, now let's bring someone in and start training them so we can do this ourselves. Because as this deadline approaches, it can be really hard to go out and find someone who understands this, hire them, pay them, get them trained, and then have them, show them your whole network. I mean, that's a lot of work. So we can typically get somebody through the process in about a month. Oh, and of course, I've kind of already hit you over the head with this. What happens if you don't do it? Well, the main thing is you could lose your contract or not have it renewed if you don't get this compliance. The other thing is you could potentially get hacked. So what you want to do is just look at your exposure and how do you reduce your attack surface for risk. If you've got a bunch of remote users and nobody's in the office and they're connecting to the network, make them use a VPN. Strongly authenticate who they are. That's your attack surface. Is they're connecting in a hotel or at the airport. That's where you're going to get popped. So you have to kind of look at your business and how your employees are distributed and how you're working and determine where is the most care needed in that. Okay, so just 2 minutes on us. I kind of talked about who we are. Our approach is basically to so we start with the CSAT. We sit with the customer a couple of hours, help them fill this out. That gives us an idea of what they think they have in terms of these 14 controls from the cybersecurity framework. Then we deploy a couple of tools. They're cloud-based. One is a network scan, so it makes a whole picture of your network and every IP address and device that you have. Typically, we find about 20% more IP addresses than the customer knows they have. Go figure. So if you think of it this, and then we run a vulnerability scan. That if you, to give you an analogy, a vulnerability scan is if you were a thief and you're trying to break into a place, you're going to stand in the parking lot or maybe across the street with some binoculars and say, they've got a fence, they've got a guard dog, they've got cameras, they've got a front door, there's a side door, what else? And sort of assess how you would break into that building. A vulnerability assessment for your network is going to scan your network and look for vulnerabilities in the system. It might be there's a server that's got an old Windows version on it. There's a laptop that has a vulnerability around Adobe, that type of thing. So we run the network scan and vulnerability assessment. We take those reports and put them into the security plan, which includes a gap analysis. So here's where you are, here's what we found. Then we make some recommendations. We include that with a plan of action and milestones. So that's you scored a 30, we need you to get to 100. Here's what you're going to do to address that 70%. And then we do continuous monitoring. So it's a year-long contract. We monitor your network the whole time. When something comes up that needs to be fixed, either you can do it with your team, or we have another service where we'll fix it for you and monitor it all the time. But the main thing is to continuously improve your posture and make sure that your organization is addressing sort of best practices with a practical implementation here. So this is an eye chart, but I put it here because you're going to get a copy of this in your email in a couple of days. If I had to sort of name my top things that you can do individually and your company can do, I mentioned the first one. I come from a mobile security background. That's the company I talked about that I was with last year, the past 7 years. But your smartphone now is the new target. Okay, all of the attacks that were happening at the desktop level for the past 10 years are now moving over into the smartphone. As these devices become more powerful and are able to use more applications, this is the new attack vector. So use a VPN. If you're storing and transmitting confidential information, you want to have on-device encryption. So there's some good options. For example, if you're using Android, you can use Samsung Knox. There's lots of different apps in the App Store for your iPhone. definitely use a VPN. Do not connect to a public Wi-Fi without using a VPN. This is where you're going to get in trouble, because the free Wi-Fi that looks like everybody can access it here at the Atlanta airport is also accessible from anywhere in the world, right? If there's not encryption and there's not strong authentication. So it may be free, but it comes with a price. Same thing with hotels, so be careful with that. Make sure you use a VPN. Make sure your organization has a plan. You know, even if it's a basic plan. Hey, we're backing up all our data, and our plan is if we get hacked, we're just going to restore all the data. At least you have something, you know, but start that conversation. Let's see. With IoT, if it doesn't have to be connected to the internet, don't do it. Don't do it. We're seeing the OT processes now punching through the firewall so that these machines that would have never been on the internet are now touching them. And lo and behold, those of you guys who live in the manufacturing world, most of these old school machines are running really old versions of Windows to do that. And so it's just a match made made down below, which is you don't want a Windows machine running XP that is touching the internet. It's just you're waiting to explode your whole business. And let's see, finally, what am I missing? Patch. Make sure all of your machines are updated and patched, because this is, if you look at the global ransomware outbreaks, this really happened because most of the world is not patching their systems, right? The biggest parts of the outbreak were in Asia, where a lot of people were using pirated versions of Windows, and when you pirate or steal a copy of Windows, you don't get updates. So that's why it spreads really fast. So you want to make sure that all of your servers have the latest patches. You want to be on all those lists so that you know when there's a new CVE or a vulnerability exploit that's published, that you know what you're affected by. So you're familiar with Microsoft's Patch Tuesday. You want to know if you're a Cisco shop when those are published, if you're a Juniper shop, if you're, get on those mailing lists and get access to that. Or work with a third party, and you don't have to worry about it, and we'll tell you when something goes wrong that you need to be worried about. So I think that's it for my quote-unquote prepared statements. I'll open it up for questions here. Sure. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Especially when you go to DEF CON. Yeah. There's a reason they remove all the ATMs at the DEF CON show. So that's a good point. You definitely should turn off Bluetooth. I mean, people don't realize that's an attack vector. If you're using a VPN, you don't have to turn off Wi-Fi, because your session is always going to be encrypted from your phone out to your destination. So that's one benefit. But absolutely, yes, if you're not using a VPN, stay on 4G, stay on LTE. You have much less of a chance of being attacked if you're on the AT&T network or the Verizon network, because they're doing some filtering of that traffic and trying to protect you, right? So it's much more difficult for an attacker to break Verizon's network and attack your phone and trick you or Verizon into thinking they're you. But Wi-Fi is very different because it's very easy to do a man-in-the-middle attack and sort of convince your company that they are you and gain access to you if you don't have the proper credentials and things like that. So, great point. And if you do go to DEF CON or any type of hacking convention, I highly recommend that you just turn off your phone altogether and go internet free for a weekend. Any other questions? We're all ready for lunch. Yes, sir. Yeah, I think so. Your corporate security policy should sort of dictate that, but from a personal perspective, there are some good ones out there. It's a fast lane. I'll take your card and email you a couple. I don't personally use them. I've gone over the years, from, you name it, kids' names, dogs' names, special characters, and now the last publications here, if you read Wall Street Journal the last couple of days, the guy who came out with the standard for the special character and length is now saying he made a huge mistake, that most password crackers can crack those. So what are you going to do? It's like one day salt is good for you and one day it's not. They keep changing. But right now the so I can get back to you with some specific vendors, but right now they're saying that phrases are better than single passwords with different characters. So, you know, the dog jumped over the moon or whatever with some characters mixed in. So that's what I'd recommend, and I'll send you those. But yeah, I think a password manager is a good idea, provided that it's one that's reputable. I mean, don't just go to the Android store and pick one, you know, out of 1,000. You can find one that, you know, you've got some user reviews and been reviewed by a couple of publications that, you know, you can trust. That's a good way to do it. And while we're on the subject of application stores, if you're an Android customer, use Google Play. If you're an iPhone customer, use the iTunes Store. Do not go out and find third-party stores because you can get an app for free. That is a surefire way to have your system taken over by third-party apps that are masquerading as something else. So a great example, they've got real estate apps where you can find, you know, how much a house is worth. A lot of those masquerade as malware. Malware masquerades as real estate apps. So you just have to be careful. Get your software from a reputable source. Is there a question in the back? Yes, sir. I did not say that. I did not say that. There's a famous story from the iTunes Store. When I started our mobile security business back in like 2010, there's a famous story where this flashlight app, flashlight app, which cost like $3, sold like hundreds of thousands of dollars when there were 20 other flashlight apps. So this 2009, when there wasn't even imagine not having a flashlight on your phone. I mean, you know, this is how early it was. But this flashlight app that was a $2 app turned out to be a disguise for an AT&T tethering service. So you could tether your phone to the internet before that was available. So they've gotten better at it, but the job has gotten more complicated on the iOS side because, and that's the Apple operating system, on the iOS side because it now multitasks. In the old days, you could only pull up one app at a time unless it was the system apps of the phone. Now you can have 10 apps open at once. So it's easier to sort of fool the system and get out of that sandbox. Google has a huge problem because of the volume of apps that they put through. So they do their best, but I don't think there's any question, and they do scan for malware. Apple's re-improved their vetting procedures, so they're looking at more apps. And as a vendor, if you've ever submitted an app, they go through a pretty rigorous process of at least knowing that you're a real person and, you know, that type of thing. But my general sentiment is, especially with Android, there's a lot of free app stores. So if you have kids or, you know, colleagues that are playing games and they want to go get something for free, just encourage them not to do that. You're much better off with Apple and Google. There's less risk, but I'm not saying that it's never going to happen. They do have instances where stuff gets through there all the time. Good question, Marlon. Thanks. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Now, I did not ask him to ask this question. I'll preface this by this. So, you know, we're trying not to make this a we're trying not to make this a product pitch. But what we've done is, because we have a parent company that is well established. They've been in business since '92, hundreds of millions of dollars, you know, in market value. They're sort of subsidizing what we're doing. We are taking these enterprise tools down market, the vulnerability scanning, the network scanning, and the resources involved in doing that. And our service is pretty inexpensive. It's designed to be affordable, and it's designed for organizations that don't have the skills, the people, the budget for these tools. And so, to give you an idea, our base service, which is a turnkey service, so it's all the documentation, the assessment, the continuous monitoring, is about $900 a month for a business with less than 50 people. So that's $10,800 a year, whatever, 11 grand a year. Now, some people may fall out of their chair, but if you go and buy a vulnerability tool and you buy a continuous monitoring tool, then you have to hire a guy to run those tools, and you got to, you know, pay for that. So in general, you're going to pay about 4 times as much, if you try to do it yourself. So we feel like it's a good approach. But your question is very valid, and then another one we get asked is, well, gee, if Wells Fargo can't keep itself from getting attacked, then how am I going to do it? You can't. You're always going to get attacked. The question is, can you identify what your critical assets are, make sure that you have a plan in place to back those up, and that you're reducing your exposure to attack. So if you look at your business, as I said, how are you operating? Do you have plants all over the United States? So you've got physical stuff to worry about. You've got connectivity between those. Analyze your business and how you do business, and that'll help you identify sort of the blind spots and what you need to protect. If you're a one-man shop that's just doing e-commerce, well, you better be with a good provider that's got encryption and PCI compliance for, credit cards and all that stuff. But it's not easy. It's complicated. And I think Dave said it best, that reality has changed. This is no longer a nice to have. This is a fact of life, and not only for us as business people, for us as consumers. You wouldn't buy a new house and not put an alarm in it. You shouldn't have a business without security. So I think, when you talk about doing business process enablement and lean and Six Sigma and all these things that really make your business more efficient, what you're going to find is that security can help you enable this. It can be an enabler. So a lot of the times you get the sort of IT geeks trying to fight with the business guys saying, like, I need this equipment to help us be more secure, and the business guys are saying, well, I don't see a return on this investment. Well, this is sort of the wrong way to look at it. You're enabling your organization to do more business safely, protect your reputation, protect your IP. That's good business. And so I think we're starting to see the conversation change, because at the board level, there's starting to be some accountability for how organizations are doing security. So I feel like I'm keeping everybody from lunch. I'll ramble for hours. Any more questions? Anybody? Great. Well, thank you very much. I'll turn it back over to Don.
Thanks, Spencer. Always very good and practical information. I learn a lot when I listen to him. It's recorded, so we'll send it out on the internet. Any other remaining questions before we break up? I'll just point out again, we're going to send this out. If you're registered, we'll send out the 2 presentations. And so the links that are in there, and you'll get those, and all the contact information, the contact either the George MEP, myself, or Spencer at Cytelix, or Dave at NIST. That information will be located on there. And Dave wanted to have a minute just to close out real quick. And yeah, I've got plenty of cards on me, so. Anyway, any other last minute questions or comments? Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming and coming out on this rainy morning, and I hope it was helpful and gave you a lot of good information. We didn't scare you, hopefully, too much. No. All right, well, thank you all for coming.